Welcome to Spirits of Whiskey. We explore the wide world of whiskey through the many colorful personalities who make it, promote it, write it, and more.
With each podcast, Kerry Moynahan, a certified Bourbon Steward and bartender, and yours truly, Philip Dobard, director of the cocktail collection, interview whiskey's most important names.
From high-profile makers, blenders, and ambassadors,
to out-of-the-way innovators and remote pioneers.
Join us as we discover the people and elements that give the water of life its spirit. Today is June 17th, 2020, and our guest is Master of Whiskey, Rick Edwards.
But first, stay tuned for this week's Whiskey Chronicles.
Have you heard about Anchor? It's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or your computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
Today we examine what it means to be a whiskey brand ambassador. What do they do? How do they do it? And, well, why do they exist?
Brands employ ambassadors because they build awareness. To do this, ambassadors must hold their appearance, ethics, and behavior to a high standard and embody the corporate identity of the company they represent. In other words, they're in the spotlight. They're on stage. And to bar owners, beverage directors, distributors, and drinkers, they're the face of a given brand.
Although specific responsibilities of a whiskey brand ambassador vary by distillery, some, common to all brands, include the following: working with the marketing team to improve sales, working with key account managers to ensure adequate supply, identifying and planning new merchandise opportunities, ensuring all activities and events promote the brand in a cohesive and consistent manner, developing a reputation in the trade as an expert whiskey taster, training people in the skill of whiskey tasting, visiting customers and key influencers to promote the whiskey, organizing and implementing customer engagement programs, building relationships with decision makers, bringing the brand to life in the minds of consumers, educating bar staff about whiskey, collecting brand performance information and analyzing the effectiveness of marketing strategies, and being a quote-unquote product evangelist for retail staff.
Some key characteristics that a whiskey ambassador should possess are a better-than-working knowledge of whiskey, including how it's made and how it's aged, public speaking and storytelling. With so many brands on the market and more debuting every week, a compelling story is critical to differentiating one brand from another. High energy and passion because, well, passion is infectious. And we think it almost goes without saying, a high degree of comfort with working unsupervised.
While a bachelor's or master's degree in management or marketing are attractive credentials, work experience, often consisting of several years tending a craft bar, sometimes provides a greater advantage. Additionally, if one has 2 to 5 years in marketing and/or brand management and/or experience in food and beverage hospitality, one has a leg up on the competition.
Even if he or she has an abundance of the aforementioned experience, a brand ambassador must undergo significant brand-specific training before being sent out on the open road to evangelize the whiskey-drinking public.
Moreover, a brand ambassador's knowledge of whiskey and spirits in general has to expand continually and must evolve beyond that of their own brands in order to be able to answer any and all questions that might arise during an interaction with a bartender, general consumer, or even a whiskey enthusiast.
Many people think the life of a brand ambassador is glamorous. They get to travel and drink for a living. The hours, however, can be very long, and workdays can be back to back to back with no break and little sleep. That, combined with being away from home and family upwards of 80% of the time, can take a toll on one's body and mind.
Here at Spirits of Whiskey, we tip our hats to the whiskey brand ambassador and thank them for what they do. Up next, we speak with Rick Edwards, Senior Master of Whiskey and a brand ambassador for over 20 years. Don't touch that device. We'll be right back.
Today on Spirits of Whiskey, we're talking to Mr. Rick Edwards. Welcome, Rick.
Well, thank you. Hi, Kerry.
Hi, Rick.
You go back some ways in this industry.
Well, I've been around. A little bit.
We recently interviewed Mr. Simon Brooking.
Yes.
Mr. Martin Duffy.
Oh, yeah. Got started with those two guys.
Yeah,
Indeed.
both of them mentioned
you. guys are responsible in part for defining the profession known as brand ambassador.
Well, let's not forget about Steve Bill, too. He was one of us. Steven was one of our
We should get Steve
guys,
on this show.
really should.
He's a colorful soul in the best way.
No, honestly, I think all of us, and I'm sure that the other boys said the same thing, that we owe it all to the legendary Evan Cadenet. And Evan is who brought us into this business and gave us our wings.
Very good.
That is another name that we've heard in those two interviews.
Indeed. Now, also, like many people who represent brands, I think particularly whiskey brands, I mean, it's common across the spirits industry, but I think particularly whiskey, you have a theatrical background.
I don't know about theatrical.
How about televisionical?
I have a little television background, extra recurring. As far as acting and theater, not so much, but I have been on quite a few shows that I really enjoyed.
Okay, you've been an extra enough on certain television shows to name drop them, yes? Like
Melrose Place. I did
Melrose
2.5 years working at Kyle's restaurant at Melrose Place.
All right.
Did many years. ER, yeah. I was a regular background extra. I was always put in the wheelchair, though, because I could do wheelies. I could pop wheelies in wheelchairs.
That's impressive.
My grandfather was a pastor, and he always had wheelchairs at his church. And my little cousin and I and my brother, we'd always skip out of the sermon, and we would go downstairs and grab the wheelchairs and start doing wheelies. And, I could do a pretty good wheelie. And so George Clooney, who's the master of pulling wheelies in a wheelchair and playing basketball, him and I would have wheelie races around the set of ER, and then at lunchtime we'd play basketball together in the wheelchairs.
Now, not only were you a TV guy, but you also danced a little? Maybe did a little modeling?
Dancing? What are you talking about? I have no idea what you're talking about.
Maybe a little Chippendales? What is this Chippendales?
Have you been talking to David Blackmore? I swear it's Blackie that drops that. No, I did dance for Chippendales for 4 years. I was part of the American team when we were celebrating the 20th anniversary. So Chippendales started in 1978 by Nick DeNoia and Stephen Banerjee. And then in 1998 for the 20th anniversary, I was on the U.S. American tour. Now, keep in mind, there was also a European tour. They were different dancers.
By the way, we're having Mr. Black.
Oh, great. Let me know. I'll call in and get them all riled up.
Yeah, we should actually, good point. Any of those listeners out there, if you go to the Anchor page for our app, you can actually leave us a voice message, and then we can get back to you. So, Rick, one of the things that we usually start out with, because as you know, this podcast was born out of COVID-19 and having to stop down on our pilot production. The pilot is called Whiskey Chef's Journey, so we always ask people, tell us about your whiskey journey.
How I got into it.
How you got into it? How did you get from Chippendales to Stranahan's?
It was the Army. I went from the United States Army out to Los Angeles. So I went in the Army in 1986. I was with the 3rd Infantry Division. Went through jump school as a paratrooper with the 1st of the 507th Airborne Division. I went to Ranger School, but never passed Ranger School because I couldn't pass land navigation. So I had to recycle in the Army, and I had to go through Ranger School all over again, and I failed the same course a second time, so I never got my TAP, as we would say. Yeah. But I did go on to Air Assault School, Light Fighter Academy, Light Leaders Course, NBC Warfare, and so I have a few medals on my chest. A couple heavy medals there.
Nice.
Got out of the military in 1992, and so my nickname in the Army was Hollywood. All my drill sergeants, all my CO, my XO, they all called me Hollywood. Joke. And so when I got out of the Army, I'm like, I'm not going back to Iowa. Ankeny, Iowa, to be exact. So Ankeny, yeah. It's just was a little
What's your
suburb.
phraseology?
Ankeny. So I moved out to Hollywood in 92, started doing background work and extra work, and, while I was doing that, I had to supplement my income because, as you know here, well, all of us, you have to have another job.
Yep.
And I wasn't willing to be a bartender or a waiter at that point because there wasn't enough flexibility to go to set when I needed to.
Right.
So I started doing promotions, and I started doing liquor promotions. And I started out as a promo model. Then I became a brand builder. Then I became a local brand ambassador for several years. Went on to be a national mentor with Simon Brooking and Marty Duffy and the rest of the team.
Yeah.
And then after about a couple of years of being a national mentor, we became one of the original masters of Scotch in the United States. And then that was a Diageo's Master of Scotch program. Yes. Yeah. So we went to the Royal Lochnagar Academy of Malt Advocates, studied with Dr. Nick Morgan and Ian Williams, and learned a whole lot about history and whiskey.
Storytelling. there's so many brands that the greatest challenge, perhaps, is differentiating the product, the brand amongst all the others. And storytelling, probably more often than not, makes the difference. Did you start out as a master storyteller, or is that a skill you developed along the way?
Well, that was actually something that we had to develop along the way. We, back when I got started, we had a thing called the Moth, I believe it was called, and it was how to art a story, how to make a story interesting, how to make a story relevant to people. So we had training on it. It's not just talking a lot and filling up words, which I tend to do quite often.
Yeah, it's presenting an art. It's, the slopes are important. You have to engage people.
Simon and Marty both mentioned the iconic historic trip to Scotland where you guys were riding a bus and learning things in a book and missing all the scenery across the country while you were learning all these things. That wasn't
the second time. That was the first time we were there with the National Mentor Program, just before we went on to Masters of Scotch at the Royal London Bar Academy. This was the National Mentor where we all traveled around the United States, mentoring local ambassadors. And it was tough. What Simon forgot to tell you was that he comes running out of a pub. I can't remember if we were on Isla or if we were on Skye. But he slips on sheep crap and breaks his ankle and had to go to the hospital. So I always remember Spike McClure chasing Simon out of the pub and him slipping on some sheep crap and breaking.
Yeah, he didn't tell us about that part. No. For you, when did you actually first start drinking whiskey, and what whiskeys were your first go-to, and then how has your palate changed over the years?
When I first started drinking whiskey, I think I was drinking it with ginger ale. So I was drinking Scotch and ginger ale, and it would be mostly ginger ale with a glass of Scotch in the very beginning. And then as I just started falling in love with whiskey in general, you started seeing those measurements changing to where it was just a splash of ginger ale in there.
These were blended Scotches?
Blended Scotches back in the days, yes. And then I think when I first started getting into the single malt category, it was definitely Isla whiskey. Nice, smoky, peaty, big earthy Isla whiskeys was really what I cut my teeth on. And then I just realized that malt whiskey is kind of where my heart is, over corn or wheat or rye. I do love a rye whiskey, but single malt is
Same for me. All whiskeys are still before vodka, gin, or anything else for me, but there's a hierarchy for me with the single malt.
Now, when you and I met, you were with the Pernod Ricard.
Pernod Ricard. Yes, that was. I worked for Pernod Ricard for about 12 years, and I worked for Diageo about 10 years.
10 years before Pernod Ricard.
I actually started with Shefflin and Somerset. For those of you out there who remember the Shefflin and Somerset days, I first got my start with Shefflin, working for those guys, and then Diageo came about.
All right. And what was your role at Pernod Ricard?
That was National Ambassador, Master of Scotch.
Okay. All right, so all of their single malt brands?
It did become Master of Whiskey after a while, because we also had all of our Irish and our Scotch whiskey in there. And soon after I departed from them, they just brought on some bourbon, so they have a new bourbon.
Yeah, diversification is really big. I mean, you look at Bacardi brands now. For instance, everyone says, oh, rum. Yes, but they also have tequila. They also have mezcal. They also have single malt Scotch. They also have, yeah. So everyone is building out their portfolios.
Yeah, I mean, some of the sister whiskeys that are in our portfolio from Stranahan's, we've got Bushmills on our Irish side. We've got Tin Cup at Pendleton over on our American side. And then Stranahan's is, of course, Rocky Mountain single malt whiskey.
So getting to the present, you're now with?
I'm with Stranahan's, National Ambassador for Stranahan's.
Okay.
And it just felt very fitting for me to go from Scottish single malt to American single malt, which is a category that's still waiting to be defined.
Yeah, it's growing.
It's coming.
It's growing, but people, even committed whiskey drinkers, still like, what? American single malt? I mean, there are quite a few in the market now, but it's still a category in formation.
It is. And I see Stranahan's, and one of the things that I love about being with this brand now and this distillery is that we were the first distillery, first legal distillery licensed in Colorado after Prohibition. Definitely a leader in the category. And I kind of feel like now, being a part of Stranahan's as their national ambassador, I have an opportunity that I can actually help really build this brand in the next coming years. So
10 years old? The brand?
Started in 2004.
2004, so 16.
2004. The first idea came about in 1998, which is a great story.
Tell the story. The origin story is fabulous.
The origin story is fun. So the name of our whiskey is called Stranahan's Colorado Whiskey. But the founder of our distillery was Jus Graber. And Jus Graber was he was a mountain distiller. He was kind of a rancher, loved to make whiskey. He was kind of a 1970s, mountain distiller, like I said. And so he was also a volunteer firefighter. And on April 2nd of 1998, he responded to a barn fire down the road. And so they went down there. They unfortunately, the firemen weren't able to save the barn, but they were able to save a lot of the beer that was in that barn.
Well, that's the most important thing.
And Jus Graber was our founder. And Jus Graber got to talking with George Stranahan, who lost the barn. And he says, well, I own Flying Dog Brewery. And Jus said, oh, you own a brewery where I do a lot of mountain distilling. So the two of them shared a passion for single malt whiskey, and they got together, and Jus Graber started distilling the brew.
Distilling the beer.
And I got to tell you this, though. It was a friendship forged in fire right there from the start.
Nice.
Ding, ding, ding. Do we have a little bell every time I get a little message?
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
So tell us more about the American single malt and why your whiskey stands out more from other whiskeys.
I mean, in America, when you look at American whiskey, outside of bourbon, outside of just American whiskey, the definition, American whiskey, bourbon whiskey, of course, you're using your corn, you got your rye whiskeys, but with 100% malted barley. There's also malt whiskey. But I need to really drive home that there's a difference between American single malt whiskey and malt whiskey.
Right.
Malt whiskey can be 51% malted barley. It can be 51% malted rye. There's really nothing differentiating. So, and I think the commission, the American Single Malt Whiskey Commission, which we are a founding member of the commission, we are trying to lobby and get a classification with a natural definition.
So do you feel like American single malts are becoming a trend, or do you think it's going to be something that's here to stay?
Oh, it's definitely here to stay. I mean, when you look at it, we were part of that founding fathers on that commission. It is just growing and growing. Now there's over 120 different American single malts on the market, and we were kind of the leaders in that category.
Yeah, it sounds like critical mass to me.
Yeah, it's moving.
Now,
and we wouldn't still be doing it if it was just a fad.
I've heard about the snowflake. What is the snowflake?
The snowflake is probably one of the rarest releases that we have at the distillery. It's kind of our little coveted, baby, our child. Here's what snowflake is. It's only available once a year, right around December time. It's only available once a year. It's only available at the distillery, and you can only get 2 bottles per person. People will line up in the freezing cold 72 hours in advance. They will be pitching tents.
That's crazy.
Sleeping out there with their bean bags to get their hands on something.
Get it before it melts.
Yeah. Get it before it melts.
And no two are alike.
Just like a snowflake, no two expressions or no two series of it.
No two releases.
So
every year it's different.
Last year, which was Mount Bros. Mount Bros was amazing. We were using some maple barrels. We were using Sangiovese barrels, some cognac barrels. We were using, New American Oak, number 3 charred. We were using some old Irish casks in there. I mean, there's just a bunch of different casks that go into it, and every year it's a different combination. So, pretty fun.
Now, you make all of your own juice. You source none of it.
From grain to glass.
Okay. All right.
Our grain comes from the Rocky Mountains.
The barley's regional as well.
Yep. All of it is Rocky Mountain barley. We're using 4 different types of barley. So of the barley we're using a pale malt for the driver. We're using chocolate malt, caramel malt, and coffee malt.
Yum.
And those different roastings of the malt will bring out different flavors. So that's just for the grist. That's just the barley to bring.
And the water is all snow melt?
The water is actually from El Dorado Springs, and I'm glad you asked that question. So El Dorado Springs was ranked the number 3 best tasting water in the world at the International Water Tasting Competition.
Wait, there's a water tasting competition?
How boring does that
No, that sounds amazing.
I'm thirsty.
I mean, what do you cleanse your palate between waters?
Right?
Crackers, saltines. How about the yeast?
Yeah, so we are using, which is different from our friends in Scotland, we're actually using a brewer's yeast. And using a brewer's yeast instead of a distiller's yeast, we're able to create a lot of different flavors, and we're able to a little bit longer fermentation time, which fermentation time is really important when you're making flavors. But even when I say grain to glass, we're milling it right there at the distillery, and we do hand bottling. So all the bottles, if you ever notice how that yellow label or the black label on Diamond Peak has a slant to it, all the labels are applied by hand by fans. So if you go to the website, stranahans.com, you can actually sign up to come to one of our bottling sessions. We do it twice a month.
That's awesome.
And they're 2 4-hour shifts. And you get free pizza. You get to keep a bottle that you batched yourself.
That's cool. How many different expressions do you guys have total?
I want to say about 6. So here, let me count them. We got original, which is a 2-year, 3-year, 4-year, and 5-year-old married together. We've got Diamond Peak, which is 4-year-old Solaris system, which means we've got these big 500, 600-liter beer vats called fooders, and we pour the 4-year-old in there from the new American oak to level 3 char. And then as we remove that whiskey, we're only removing about 80% out. So we're going to keep about 20% of that 4-year-old in the fooders. And then we add more 4-year-old. So there's a constant mingling. For those of you who don't know what a Solaris system is,
it's how sherry is made.
It's kind of like sourdough bread.
Yep,
exactly. With the mother.
Indeed. There's always some, 100 years from now, if you get a bottle of Diamond Peak, there's going to be something that was there at the very beginning.
At the very beginning, correct.
Well, now I'm going to have it with sourdough bread.
We got the sherry cask, which is a straight 4-year-old, finished in sherry. Oloroso. My next question. And then we've got the Snowflake, and then we've got, during the summer month, we have Cask Thief. So Snowflake and Cask Thief happen in the summer. It's more interactive. You can kind of choose what barrel we're going with. And then we've got our Cask Strength and the single barrel program. So a single barrel program is if you own a liquor store or even a restaurant, you can buy a full barrel, and then we give you the barrel, and then we give you a big 1.75 liter with the etched, your logo etched on it.
That's cool.
You say these are all hand bottled. I notice we're looking at 2 right here in the studio. We have 2 bottles in front of us, empty somehow. I don't know how that happened, but
it's higher that
the labels are at different points on the bottle. One's higher than the other, and that's.
If you go to the liquor stores and you're looking at the bottles on the shelves, you're going to notice that the labels are at different angles. I mean, ideally, we try to train people start here, because you can see on the back of it, you want to start right up there by the where it says bottles, and then you want to kind of put that angle all the way down to where it meets the 200 bottom there. So there is, but as you're sipping on some whiskey and putting labels on, of course they're all going to be crooked. Maybe not uniform.
What I like about the bottles is that they come with this jigger type thing.
That's our famous, it's a little tin cup that is at the top of every Stranahan's bottle. And that's kind of a nod back to the old cowboy days, because keep in mind that Jeff Graber, he was a rancher, and George Stranahan was a rancher and a philanthropist. So that way you always have a drinking vessel with you.
And how many ounces?
It looks like it's about 2.5.
Okay.
Yeah. I love that, and I love that they're different colors depending on which expression.
Very nice, very nicely done.
Oh, the thief one. That's what I wanted to ask you about.
Thief.
Yes, Cask Thief. So what is that exactly?
So that's Cask Thief is another innovation that we do throughout the summertime. And people come, it's like a big event that we put on, and interactive. So Cask Thief is, every year is going to be different. We're using different
So do you get
casks.
to take your own thief and pull your own?
Well, Owen Martin is our head distiller. And Owen Martin, this guy studied in Scotland. He's got 2 different degrees in the fermentation sciences and distillation, and he's just a brilliant guy, very passionate. So he kind of walked people through. When you go to our distiller, if you get the chance to meet Owen Martin, you really got to meet this guy. He's just brilliant. So he helps you thieve.
Oh, okay, so he helps you.
So he'll show you how to work the Valange, how to work the whiskey thief. If you go to my Instagram, you can see me thieving.
That's awesome.
Straight out of
For those of you listeners who don't know what a thief is, well, you should, because you're a whiskey drinker. But it is this very long, either metal or glass. It's kind of like what do you call those things with the turkey? A turkey baster. It's kind of like a very long turkey baster, but without the bulb on the top, and you use it with like a thumb to do pipetting. Which, if you're into science, you know what that is.
And they're used with all aged spirits,
right?
And with wines. In which case it's called a wine thief. You stick it in because you need to test these barrels as they age.
Right. So you just stick it in through the bunghole and pull it out. Kind of like when you're using a straw and you put your straw in the water and you put
that is the best analogy I think I've heard of.
Very good. Yeah, everyone's seen them, but very few people know what.
Right.
They're called a thief.
Yep, a thief. And hence, Cask Thief is the name of our whiskey. Again, you cannot buy Cask Thief at the stores. You have to buy it at the distillery. And for those of you, if you're ever in Denver, Colorado, Stranahan's distillery is right on the outskirts of town. I mean, it's basically downtown. Address is 200 South Calumet Street. And we've been at the Calumet Street distillery since 2009.
Okay.
So we moved from Blake Street, which is right in the heart of downtown Denver, just outside.
I'm assuming because you needed more space.
Well, we had an opportunity. Because I told you we were using Flying Dog beer to make our
You're
wash.
distilling from drinking beer.
Yes, from drinking beer, which is
I love that.
it's a great story.
That's among my favorite whiskeys, is distilled from drinking beer. Because they have a very distinctive flavor.
Right.
They do. And when you distill that, it comes out unlike anything that you're really going to taste out of Scotland. Well, they moved out to Maryland.
They
That's
flew.
They
the coop.
flew, yeah.
Yep. So then we had the opportunity to buy another distillery on the outside of town, and then we just moved in there in 2000.
Okay. So you're
So
still
we're not-
distilling from drinking beer.
Well, not anymore. When we moved in, we were able to bring full production into house in 2009. So we're making our own beer. We're not using any hops.
Right.
We're not using it, but we are using, like I said, the 4 varieties of barley, the specialty barleys, our slurry, yeast slurry, brewer's yeast. And we're
It's
making
very appetizing
we're making our own
expression,
wash.
by the way, yeast slurry.
Yeah, it is.
I just want to smear it on toast. Yes. That's-
Heavenly Days is the name of the brewery that we bought.
Okay.
And before Heavenly Days, it was a beef jerky factory, a paper mill. And our warehouse number 2, which is great, is an old theater, which I think you would like, Philip.
Sure.
Called Sioux Teatro. And the Sioux Teatro Theater was a community theater.
Mhm.
So when you go into our warehouse, you've got all the wooden rafters, and it's an amazing
That's
building.
wonderful. It's a wonderful story.
Yep. Sioux Teatro, and we call it 215, even though it's warehouse 2.
Uh-huh.
So you just get a feeling of just walking around in there, like you can see where the stage would have been before we lined it with barrels.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I like that.
Cocktails?
Cocktails.
Okay, so we talked to all of our guests about cocktails.
Yes.
I'm director of the cocktail collection, so we gotta, we have to give it a nod. But it's very interesting the answers we
Oh, yes.
get from our guests.
Yeah, my favorite was margaritas. We didn't even drink whiskey before. we had the
Indeed.
Pappy Van Winkle sisters on, the triplets, the descendants, and all of their bios said margaritas, and I was like, what? So we had some fun with that
They
one.
are late to whiskey. Now they're into it. Yeah. So do you have a favorite? We never ask what's your favorite cocktail. Because why limit yourself? But categories: stirred, shaken, built.
Sure. I get this question all the time, Philip. And, even ambassadors throughout the temperature of the industry right now, a lot of ambassadors are rock star, award-winning bartenders.
Indeed.
And like when I first started out in 1996, what is that, 24 years ago?
It is.
You would have never thought of using, scotch, or at least a single malt in a cocktail. So I've kind of spent my whole journey I like scotch neat, scotch in a glass, scotch on a rock. I'm not a big cocktail guy myself, so when people ask me what my favorite cocktails are, this is hard for me to answer because I normally drink my whiskey neat. However, we have a master mixologist at our distillery. His name is Lucas Townsend. And Lucas and Izeppa is also one of our tour guides. She's also one of our key mixologists at the distillery.
Cool.
In our lounge, you can get a ton of really great cocktails. And I taste these things, not being a cocktail guy myself, and I'm blown away at what they can create. And I did jot down a few names of the cocktails we serve at the general store at the distillery. So one is called Jalapeno Business. And it sounds like all up in your business, but it's jalapeno business.
Oh, I love that.
Who was it? I think it was Zeppa or Lucas made Sage Against the Machine. We've got Vitamin C, SEA, Vitamin C. One in a Melon. What else do we got?
This sounds like...
Right,
that Philip named all these, I
call
swear.
me the Punisher.
The Punisher, that's good.
So this is working for me.
Liquid Encouragement. Clove-minded.
Oh my God, that's funny.
What else do we got? The Audubon. the autumn fond.
Wonderful.
Oh, we do have one that's a cinnamon cookie old fashioned.
Ooh. I mean,
Yes,
Which
please.
makes your mouth water
I
right
know.
away.
Are they doing the cocktails to go like a lot of people right
Yes,
now?
if you live in the Denver area, you can actually call in. You can go into our general store and you can get some cocktails made by Izeppa and Lucas together. Lucas does hold a Friday cocktail class on Instagram.
Oh, cool.
So you can always see Lucas doing that. He actually had me try to make a cocktail one time, and I tell you, I haven't seen somebody laugh so hard in my life.
So are they? I know a lot of people now, because of COVID and all of that's going on in the world, have been starting to do these cocktail to go programs where you can basically order, everything except for the alcohol and then have it sent. Are you guys doing that too? Or
Exactly.
That's
yes.
awesome.
Yes. You can find all that information at Stranahans.com or the Stranahans Instagram.
Here's a question not related to cocktails. Distribution. Is Stranahan's available in all 50?
Yes.
Okay.
Is there anything else that you wanted to tell us about Stranahan's or about your personal whiskey journey, or a highlight of your whiskey journey that you think is just so fun you had to share with the world?
We all know you drink vodka and cranberry at home, but
No. I guess a couple of things, keep in mind that we're like 5,900 or 5,490 feet above sea level. And because of the Rocky Mountains and our barometric pressures, our stills come into a boil faster. So, our alcohol is boiling at a lot lower temperature than other distilleries are going to get. So I think that also is the time and the speed and rate at which we're coming into a boil. It plays an effect on that whiskey too. So I think it's very unique to the Rocky Mountains. Keep in mind that, the Red Rocks, the amphitheater, we are the official whiskey of the Red Rocks in Colorado.
Oh, nice.
So that's
Very
kind
nice.
of fun.
So Stranahan's doesn't just get you high, it gets you a mile high.
Get you a mile high whiskey, yeah.
Wait, can I get into that Mile High Club?
Yeah, sure. Like you're not a member. The girl who's drank whiskey all over the world.
Yeah, not all over. I mean, only to the parts of the world I've been, which is a bit,
A fair many.
Well, we want to thank you so much for coming out today, Rick. It was great to have actually live in the studio for a change instead of all these remotes due to the COVID lockdown. So it's nice to be able to get a local guy from LA in here.
Just about 15 minutes down the street.
I know. I love it. So thanks again.
Thank you.
We enjoyed
Very much,
having you.
Philip, Kerry, thank you for having me on, and it was really fun to come in and see you guys again and be able to be on your show.
Great. Well, thanks, Rick.
Cheers.
World of Wheezy is up next. Stay with us. Hey Louise, how you doing today? We got you in the house for Stranahan's whiskey from Colorado.
I'm super excited to be here with you, Kerry, and I'm really excited to talk about this Stranahan's. What a cool whiskey.
So tell me what you thought. I was talking with Rick about it, and there's not a lot of single malt whiskeys made in America, and Stranahan's, that's all they do is single malt. So it's kind of I really like it because I'm a single malt Scotch lady myself, so it makes me happy to have a single malt American whiskey.
Yeah, I mean, their story is really cool, and especially once I found out that the owner started Flying Dog Brewery, which, I'm a beer gal, so that spoke to me right away, and I was thinking like, okay, well, I know a lot about barley in terms of how it relates to beer, and then using malted barley for their single malt whiskey, I just knew before even tasting it I was gonna love it. So the first one I tasted was that Diamond Peak. Wow, that was cool. It was sweet and caramelly and creamy and delicious, and had you given me a bigger pour, I would have drank more of it. But it's probably better. I do have to be productive today, so it's all good. But one thing I was thinking is I think I want that with a fresh homemade apple pie.
Ooh.
Yes, I was getting, some vanilla from the oak barrel. Like I said, the caramel from the malt, a little bit of pepper.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, and every now and again when I make an apple pie, I will put a touch of black pepper in there. It's a little je ne sais quoi. Yes, people are like, what's in this? That would be black pepper. But here's the kicker. Being that I am from Wisconsin, I put a big slice of sharp cheddar cheese on top of the pie. You will find recipes that call for it in the crust, that's fine. But that is not the way we do it in Wisconsin.
Wow.
You slice a big chunk, you put it on the pie when it's hot, and it melts. And so you get that savoriness of the cheese, and whiskey and cheese, hello.
Right.
I mean, is like a perfect match. Plus the sweetness from the apples with this whiskey. Completely perfect.
That is
really good.
Awesome. So what did you think of the Yellow Label single malt whiskey?
Oh, that one was exactly kind of what I had expected it to be, because I had read the tasting notes. Again, being that this is, one of the only distilleries in the U.S. making whiskey like this, I was super intrigued by it. And I thought right away when I tasted it that if I were in Colorado, if I were on a ski slope and I was freezing cold and I came in and I was starving, I would really want a big ass pour of that.
Yep.
And then I would order some beer battered fish and chips. And here's the thing. If I could use their beer, the Flying Dog Brewery beer, for that beer battered fish and chips, something malty, although they do make this Belgian IPA called Raging Bitch, which I think I would probably have to use. But anyway, a beer battered fish and chips with, classic, with malt vinegar paired with this whiskey, like on a cold, blistery night.
Oh, that sounds amazing.
Yeah, I think it would be really good.
I say that every time I talk to you because everything you say always sounds amazing. There's not been one thing that you've told me about that I'm like, yeah, I want to try that.
Well, I mean, let's face it. These whiskeys that you've been presenting to me are also good. Even if I was like, here's a bag of Cheetos, you'd be like, yeah, that works. So all good.
Well, thank you so much for your input on the Stranahan's whiskeys, both the Diamond Peak and the single malt whiskey. Thanks for coming by, and we'll see you again next week with our next guest.
All right, see you next week.
Please visit our website to see our show notes on today's podcast at spiritsofwhiskey.com. That's whiskey with an E.
We'll include links and supporting documents from today's Whiskey Chronicles, as well as tasting notes and recommendations from today's World of Wheezy.
As always, you can see our upcoming topics and guest roster and links to past shows. Thanks for joining us.
Until next time, Salam.
Slanchava. Spirits of Whiskey is a production of First Reel Entertainment and the Center for Culinary Culture, home of the Cocktail Collection, and is available on Anchor, Spotify, and wherever fine podcasts can be heard.